going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here for our DFS core plays for the Memorial Tournament. We're coming off the Charles Schwab Challenge, which, oh boy, was an exciting one, both as a viewer and, of course, somebody invested financially. Sam Burns coming through, getting that win for us was huge on pretty much every single market. So I'm a happy golf fan hitting on a JT and a Sam Burns outright back to back. But here in this video specifically, we're going to be going over our core picks for next week's tournament, the Memorial. It is one of my favorite events of the year. It's a track that is extremely difficult. And if you've been following the channel, you know that I like when the players tend to struggle, especially when conditions get tough and you tend to see a few over par rounds from the leaders. That's really what I'm looking for from a golf course, to see those over par rounds. Birdie fest, when you're going out there shooting 5 to 6 under par every single day, well, that could be nice from time to time. I don't like that. I don't like when it's a regularity on the PGA Tour. I like seeing some of these more difficult tracks mixed in. So, like I said, going over our core picks for this week, we're going to cover my top 6 plays for GPP contest. So these are going to be foundational pieces of my lineups. Of course, a lot could change over the week. Ownership is going to mature. We're going to get an idea of a lot of the rostership of these players. But in either circumstance, I'd imagine that these 6 players make my poll pretty much no matter where they come in. They're solid plays. All of them model in my top 30. In fact, 5 of the 6 model in my top 12 for the week. So in terms of whether I would fade them as chalk, I probably wouldn't, right? They're plays that model out well, even if they're going to be popular. I'm at the very least going to be matching the field. So that's the idea with a core pick. And of course, the idea is just to give you an idea of some of the plays that I'm building around, and of course, the types of players that I'm targeting, right? Obviously, we're going to be talking a lot about skill set fit, a lot about the course here during this video. A lot of what I say about one golfer could, of course, apply to anyone else in the field. So with that being said, a lot that we want to talk about here with our core picks. Let's go ahead and hop right on into it. All right, we've got the projections on the screen, and as per usual, let's start with a review of the golf course before we start to talk about these plays. So on the key stats tab, you can see that it's a relatively well-rounded week. Of course, shots gained approach is going to be the number 1 stat I'm looking at, but shots gained around the green is there at number 2, which would certainly be a surprise if you've been following the model here. But shots gained off the tee, shots gained putting round out the top 4, so no real surprises in terms of our top 4 stats. In terms of some of the supplementary stats, not many. Just 3 for the week. You can see shots gained on Nicklaus designs. So of course, a lot of the comp courses there going to be baked in that way. 3 putt avoidance and also shots gained out of the rough. So it's a relatively vanilla week when it comes to the modeling. And that's just because of the data that we have. We have so much data over the years from Muirfield Village, from the variety of different names of the events that have been held here. In either circumstance, we have a lot of correlated data. We know that first off, this is an approach golf course. That's why it's there at number 1. We know that around the green is a lot more important at Muirfield Village than pretty much any other golf course. And we also know that off the tee, slightly less important here. And same thing with shots gained putting. So they're still rounding out the top 4, but that's why around the green edges the 2 when it comes to importance. You're going to miss a ton of greens here. In fact, you either need to be really solid with your approach play and hardly miss any greens to begin with to find some success around here, or when you miss a lot of greens, which this is going to be the avenue for most of the field, you have to be able to get up and down. So that's why it's so important here compared to other golf courses. But outside of that, not really a unique course, right? You pretty much got to be good at everything to have success around this track. So with the golf course out of the way, now let's talk about our core picks. So for me, my spend up option for this week is going to be Rory McIlroy at $10,900. He comes in at number 1 in my total model ranking, so shouldn't be a surprise that he makes it into the core picks video, but pretty much from whatever angle you look at here is giving us exactly what we're looking for. So let's start with the best attributes, which of course would be the recent form for a Rory. You can see he's gaining across the board. In fact, the only category where it's just a marginal gain would be with the flat stick, but around the green, the approach play, the off the tee play is elite level stuff. In fact, off the tee and approach, he's top 5 in both categories. And around the green, he's also top 10 in that category. So of course, putting up the numbers we'd expect from somebody of his caliber. The real issue, again, has been the flat stick. But the one thing we can say is that on bent grass, he's been his best self. You've seen that of late. I mean, at the Wells Fargo Championship, was draining a ton of putts. A lot of them were for par, unfortunately, with how difficult those conditions were. But this week, with bent grass, very pristine bent grass greens, I'd expect that same trend to continue, which, of course, a lot of these 24 rounds were on Bermuda grass, so perhaps that's why he saw some of that regression. But now that he's on a little bit more of a familiar surface, maybe he can start to regress towards the mean. So over the last 50 rounds, you can see a lot of those stats hold up. In fact, he's even better with the flat stick, gaining close to a quarter of a stroke per round. And this metric over here, where it's comparing the bent grass to the 50-round baseline, keep in mind that's comparing to this 0.25 baseline, right? A quarter of a stroke over par. That means that on bent grass, he's gaining well over half stroke per round. If we were comparing this to the last 24 rounds, which maybe for Rory McIlroy would make a little bit more sense, he's over half a stroke better per round on bent grass. So if we're going to see any type of regression from Rory, we'd expect that to be in the positive direction for him on this surface. So given the ball striking, tee to green stats have just been ridiculous for him. We could see even better putting coming from Rory McIlroy. I mean, this recent run of form, which has already been ridiculous, an 8th place at the PGA, a 5th at the Wells Fargo, a 2nd place at the Masters, is starting, could turn into wins, rather than just top 5, top 10 finishes. He could rattle off 2 or 3 wins in a row. I would not put that past Rory McIlroy at this point. And given the course fit here, which we haven't really even talked about all that much, I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it's close to ideal. I mean, off the tee, he has the distance to take apart the holes where that's really an option. I mean, there's certainly holes where he's going to have to lay up, pretty much like everyone else in the field. So that's why distance isn't the main factor we're looking at here. But at the same time, he's got the approach play we're looking for, particularly with some of the long irons, where he's among the best in PGA Tour history. Not even just of what we're seeing right now, but around the green, he was gaining over half a stroke per round. And like I said, on these bent grass greens, particularly, at the Masters, right? He finished in 2nd place, gained a ton of strokes on the greens at Augusta National. You have very similar greens at the Memorial. Lots of undulation. They tend to run fast at their bent grass greens. So why not Rory McIlroy this week? So I expect a lot of people to go to a Jon Rahm, to a Patrick Cantlay, who their course history is just bar none, right? If we take a look at that, you'll see Jon Rahm, of course, last year had to withdraw, but he was in 1st place. He won the year before that. If Patrick Cantlay, who has multiple wins here, a top 5 finish in 2018. And then Rory McIlroy is kind of all over the place, right? He has a top 10, but also a missed cut on the record, and an 18th and a 32nd place finish. So if that's going to keep people off of Rory this week, he's going to be something like 15 to 18% owned, then I'm going to be thrilled about that. In terms of the model, in terms of, how his skill set should line up with the golf course, I expect him to have a better track record than both of those players. And at least over the last 5 years, that hasn't been the case. So for me, it's a huge buy-in spot for Rory McIlroy. I mean, in terms of projected cut rate, you can see he's at a 96.63% made cut rate. One of the safest plays that you can go to on the board. So certainly a core pick, and will be in at least 40, maybe even 45% of my lineups here for this week's contest. Next up, we have Cameron Smith at $9,900, and you can see he's number 3 in my model's rank for the week. He's somebody who's got the short game that we're looking for, of course, around the green. One of, if not the best player in the world at getting up and down. The putting on bent grass, he's right around a neutral compared to his baseline, but for Cam Smith, it's an outrageously high baseline to begin with, so of course should be going out there and gaining in bunches in that category. And of late, the approach play has been elite level stuff. So if we take a look at that, you can see he's gaining over a stroke per round. In fact, he's number 1 in the field in shots gained approach. And last time at the PGA Championship, absolutely went off. Just was the best iron player in the field, bar none. And really at this point, if he's going to be that elite level iron player, be the best short game player in the world, he's unbeatable. He's probably the best player in the world if the iron play holds up. And off the tee, he's relatively long off the tee. You have some of the easier hit fairways here at Memorial that right around a 70.2% fairway percentage, at least last year for 2021. If it's going to be easy to hit fairways and he can lean into that approach play in that short game, I mean, this is just Cameron Smith's tournament to take. In fact, I've already placed an outright bet on the Aussie. I think that first off, the 22-1 number I got should lower by the end of the week. As people start to dive into these stats, particularly the approach numbers for Smith, which of late have been otherworldly, people are going to be tempted to fire on that number like I was. So I wanted to lock that in as early as I can. We take a look at even further into his stats. So take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, a little bit of a larger sample size. He's still gaining close to a stroke per round, right? So not quite the 1.3 strokes per round that we have over the last 24 rounds, but still some pretty solid stuff. So Cameron Smith at his price tag, I think that, realistically, he could be where Patrick Cantlay is in terms of pricing. At $10,700, I wouldn't argue it, right? The recent form speaks for itself. If we take a look at it, first off, 13th at the PGA. He ended up finishing 21st at the Zurich, whatever. That's not all that good. Third place at the Masters, win at the Players Championship. Just anytime you get this guy at a big-time event, he's pretty much finishing in the top 15 every single time. And most of the time, it's in the top 5 or even winning the event like we've seen from him at the Players Championship. So I've been very high on the Aussie for quite some time. I've talked him up as a top 5 player in the world for at least the last year, and wouldn't surprise me at all to see him take this thing home. And the one thing that you can, kind of hold back from a Cam Smith is that he hasn't won here. He hasn't played here at all, in fact. If you take a look at the last 5 years, he has no course history to speak of. So that would be the one concern that I have about him. But outside of that, I'm expecting the absolute world from him around Memorial. So have him in my player pool. He's going to be a key piece in my lineups, at least in that 35 to 40% plus range in terms of exposure. Next up, we have Shane Lowry at $9,000, and he's number 2 in my model's ranking, and he is undoubtedly going to be at least in the top 3 when it comes to projected ownership, if not clearly the highest owned play on the slate. And I predicted that this morning. I was hoping he'd be priced closer to $9,800, a little bit more expensive. That would temper his ownership, and we didn't get that. I said that if he was right around $9,000, we'd be looking at like 25% owned Shane Lowry. And unfortunately, that is the circumstance that we're in. The plus side is we get more salary to use when we're using Shane Lowry. The unfortunate part is everyone's going to use Shane Lowry this week, and it makes sense. The shots gained metrics for Lowry are otherworldly. That's just the only way to put it. He's gaining in every category, but gaining almost over a quarter of a stroke per round in every category. That includes solid gains off the tee and on approach of right around 0.4 of a stroke per round, gaining close to 0.7 of a stroke per round with the putting. And over his last 50 measured rounds, it really doesn't drop off all that much. You can see the ball striking numbers actually improve. The putting numbers actually get a little bit better. So, no matter what sample size you look at with the Shane Lowry, he's putting up pretty much the same numbers, which are just outrageously solid ball striking numbers. We know he's one of the best short game players in the world. He's top 3, just like a Cameron Smith. Those two are maybe Patrick Reed's up there, Jordan Spieth. Those 4 players are guaranteed to be in the top 5 of short games. Probably Justin Thomas is the other one in that top 5. At this golf course, that is exactly what we're looking for. If Justin Thomas was in the player poll, he would have probably been my core pick over somebody like Rory McIlroy, right? Because he has a sharper short game than somebody like Rory. But these are the options that we have. In either circumstance, though, he's just a completely mispriced player. If we take a look at the course history, it isn't anything crazy for Lowry. You can see last year he finished 6th, which was pretty great, but missed cut there in 2020, 52nd in 2018, 15th in 2017. So it's kind of all over the place, but not really anything that we can use to either help the case for him or hurt the case for him. But one thing I want to note here is that a lot of the course history is volatile. Even for guys that have top 10 finishes, you're going to see a lot of missed cuts sprinkled in. Look at Max Homa here, right? Missed cut after his 6th placed finish there. You can see missed cut 3 times for Keegan Bradley, but also a top 25 finish. You have people like Joaquin Niemann, who his first trip here was relatively successful, but his last 2 times out were missed cuts, right? So I know a lot of those players we're not going to talk about here on this video, but just understand that with course history, I'm not weighing it that much this week. It's been volatile for even the best players. Rory McIlroy has a missed cut here like we talked about before. Xander Schauffele has a missed cut here, even though he finishes like top 14 every single year. And even Jordan Spieth, who has had a ton of success around Memorial, despite not having a win at this track, had a missed cut in 2018. So, just because somebody like Lowry missed the cut here in 2020, it's not going to talk me off the play. There's plenty of solid options in this field, solid course fits that have had trouble around the Memorial, and it makes sense. It's a difficult track. You're talking about a scoring average of over par for a par 72. And if you don't have your best stuff, it's very easy to shoot something like 5 to 6 over par. And to try and recover from that type of round at a golf course like this, it's just really hard to do. It's a lot to ask for. So just course history, not the biggest thing I'm looking at. A lot of these shots gained metrics mean a lot more to me. And of course, the recent form for Lowry is top 5 in the world, right? Top 25 finish at the PGA. That's probably a disappointing performance for Lowry at this point, because it's a 13th at the Zurich, 3rd at the Heritage, 3rd at the Masters. He had the 2nd place at the Honda Classic, multiple other top 10 finishes to round out the stretch before that. So if you're looking for a hot golfer, somebody that fits the golf course as well, in terms of Muirfield Village fit, he's number 1 in the field. Shane Lowry is your guy. There's no better option in the field. Now, if you're looking for somebody that's a low-owned pivot play, he's probably about the worst option you can go to. He's going to be most likely the chalk of the chalk here on the slate. So, like I said, the reason why he's a core pick is that won't matter to me. He's still going to be in at least 40% of my lineups. And if he ends up being 25, 30% owned, might have to be half of my lineups. We'll have to see here come Wednesday. Make sure to stop by the live stream to hear my final take on all of these players. Next up, we have Corey Connors. I like him here in the middle of this 8K range. And anytime we get a difficult golf course that prioritizes ball striking, hitting fairways, gaining a bunch of strokes off the tee and on approach, Corey Connors is going to jump to the top of the list. In fact, he's number 12 in my modeling, despite being close to number 20 in terms of actual pricing. The recent form metrics have been there, and particularly with the putter, which for Corey Connors is surprising, but it's been relatively consistent. You can see he's gaining close to a third of a stroke per round with the flat stick, but over the last 50 measured rounds, it's been pretty darn good as well. In fact, he's still gaining 12 100ths of a stroke per round with the flat stick. And the ball striking is always going to be top 10 in the world. He's going to gain a ton of strokes off the tee, both with his distance and his accuracy. One of those rare players that has that combination. His shots gained approach is usually going to be top notch. And even shots gained around the green, even though he's been a slight loser in that category over his last 24 rounds, he's typically a lot sharper than that. So, in terms of the putting, that's usually the X factor for him. If he can continue that type of rate this week, he has all the tools to go out there and at the very least post a top 25 finish, which you pretty much expect from Corey Connors every time he tees it up. Among the most consistent players that you'll find on tour. If you take a look at the recent form, you'll see what I'm talking about here. He does have a missed cut at the PGA, which was a little bit surprising, but he's a made cut machine other than that, right? 21st at the Wells Fargo, top 25 machine, 12th place at the Heritage, 6th place at the Masters, another made cut at Valero. I remember at one point last year, he had made something like 20 of 21 cuts. If looking for a floor, a cash play, Corey Connors at these difficult tracks is the guy to go to. So I like the course fit here. I like the fact that the recent form metrics have been there, and perhaps that missed cut at the PGA is going to keep enough people off of him, right? People, feel burned by him. He was relatively chalky at the PGA as well. And if that's going to keep him in that 12 to 15% owned range rather than that 15 to 25% owned range like he probably deserves to be, I'm certainly going to have a lot of leverage there. So I like the recent form metrics. I like what we've seen in terms of some of the recent form, right? At least the last time out wasn't the best, but outside of that, really impressive track record there. And the course history, though it isn't ideal, at least he's made the cut, right? He's made the cut in all 3 appearances, top 25 finish there in 2020. And like I said before, there is a volatile course history here, right? Guys can be making the cut, go out there and miss the cut. So, also, that could go one way for a Corey Connors. But then you have guys that don't really have any impressive finishes and go out there and finish in the top 5 out of nowhere, right? Give you an example, right? Look at this, Joaquin Niemann, right? His one finish there in 2018 was a top 10 finish. Outside of that, hasn't really done anything. So for Corey Connors, hopefully this will be his year at the Memorial, because from a stat standpoint and from a course fit perspective, it sure looks like he's the class of this range when it comes to DFS plays. Next up, we've got Chris Kirk. This will be one of our value options here for this week. And at $7,700, he's number 9 in my total model ranking. I'm not surprised that he makes the core pick list. He's going to be popular. Before he ended up having this stretch of golf, at the PGA Championship, he wasn't coming in with the best form, and I talked him up. He was a great course fit at Southern Hills. Went out there, of course, had a very solid finish. So just to show you where he finished 5th there. Last week, of course, we rode that momentum. It was another positional golf course where you got to have that tee to green play. Went out there, finished top 15. And
that one thing for sure, right? He's coming in with form, right? A top 5 finish, a top 15 finish. He's also a very streaky golfer. I mean, just look at that Florida swing. When he gets on a heater, watch out. Chris Kirk is somebody you want to ride on those heaters. He's not somebody who goes up and down. When he has his game, he usually has his game. And when he's struggling, you usually want to stay pretty far away from a Chris Kirk. So I do like what we're seeing there. You can see outside those last 2 finishes, did have a top 21 finish at the Zurich Classic, made the cut at Valero. You can see he was a little bit volatile before that, so it's nice to see him rounding into this form because the ball striking metrics are just otherworldly for Chris Kirk right now. Just look at this. Gaining close to half a stroke per round off the tee, on approach, and around the green. That was the same story last week. He continued to do that at the Charles Schwab Challenge, and the putter is what's starting to turn around. He was losing a ton of strokes about a month ago on tour, actually over half a stroke per round lost with this putter, which was playing him out of events. In fact, even though he was playing so well from tee to green, he was missing a few cuts because of the flat stick. But the one thing we can say about him is he's great. He loves bent grass. In fact, close to half a stroke better per round on the surface than he is on any other surface. So a lot of the reason we've seen this resurgence, and it's a lot of the reason I liked him at the PGA Championship, is he loves bent grass. He went out there, gained strokes to the field on the greens. Last week, went out there, was a much better putter than he usually is on the greens. And if he does that this week, combined with the shots gained tee to green metrics that he's been putting up for quite some time. In fact, over his last 50 measure rounds, look at this, it's still ridiculous. Gaining close to half a stroke per round in every category. I mean, the guy is very easily a top 10 here, if not a top 5 or a win here at this event. So one of my favorite plays on the board for sure. The modeling reflects that. The recent form reflects that. The eye test reflects that from what we saw last week. I'd expect him to be popular just because of those finishes, but I'm not jumping off the train at this point. This is another golf course where you have to have that tee to green play, which of course he has in bunches that we can see from the tee to green metrics. It's also a golf course where putting not as important as most weeks, and that's what he struggles at. And if there's going to be a golf course or a surface that he finds success on, it's going to be bent grass, right? So everything points to him having a solid week this week, going to be in that 30 to 35% range when it comes to exposure. And lastly, the last guy we're going to talk up here at the bottom of the 7K range is going to be Luke List at $7,100. In terms of the model ranking, he is the worst play on the field. In terms of his Muirfield Village fit, and that's really the reason we're playing him here, he's number 22, so he has that going for him. But let's talk about the play. This is a similar golf course from a skill set perspective to what we had at the Farmers Insurance, what we had at Torrey Pines. It's a relatively long golf course. You know, this is 7,500 yards, so not quite the beast we have over there at Torrey Pines South. But it's a golf course where you have that gnarly rough. That is a consistency. It's a long iron golf course. That is certainly the case with Muirfield Village. And you have very undulating, fast, bent grass greens. Now they're POA over there on the west coast. It's bent grass over this way. But from a speed and undulation standpoint, very similar surfaces. And on POA, Luke List is a little bit better than he is on most surfaces. So that was a reason that we went to him here. You can see on bent grass, he is a lot better than what he has been over his last 24 rounds or last 50 measured rounds. Over a third of a stroke better per round. So if we liked him at the Farmers, that was a long iron golf course. In fact, again, just slightly better than his baseline in terms of his putting. This week, even more so the case. He's going to be relatively low owned because of some of the recent form. I'm all in on Luke List, right? He got us a win last time around, but for DFS, if he just gets us a top 15 finish or a top 10 finish at this price tag, I'd be more than thrilled with that. And I certainly think it is well within his range of outcomes. We take a look at the recent form. While it hasn't been ideal for Luke List, he's still kind of doing his thing, right? He's gaining off the tee close to a stroke per round, still a positive in the approach category, and losing a ton of strokes with the putting. We take a look at the last 50 measured rounds. A lot of that holds up. He's a very predictable player, gaining a little bit more significantly when it comes to the approach play, still close to a stroke per round off the tee, and the putter, still a huge negative. Now, the one thing that is surprising over his last 24 rounds is the negative with the around the green play, because historically, Luke List, a great player at getting up and down. And that's one of the reasons that I like him this week. He's somebody who, when he misses greens, is used to hitting it to 3 or 4 feet, and he needs to, given how bad he is with the flat stick. So from a historical standpoint, this is a great golf course for him. He's a long iron specialist, like I said, pretty solid around the green, at least from a historical standpoint, maybe not so much over his last 24 rounds. And if he can find any semblance of a putter, right? I know even though he's over a third of a stroke better per round on the surface, he's still not a positive putter. But if he goes out there and he's even a neutral putter, I mean, that's enough for a top 10 finish. God forbid he goes out there and actually gains strokes to the field like he did at the Farmers. I mean, that's when he runs away and actually wins this event. So I'm getting very similar vibes to what we had over there in San Diego. And at $7,100, it's going to be in at least 25, maybe even 30% of my lineups this week. All right, that's all I've got for the core picks. Before you hop on out of here, let me know who you've got winning this week. And for me, Rory McIlroy, I've already placed an outright on. I really like Cam Smith as well. But for my official pick here, we'll go with Cam Smith, right? I love the course fit. I like the momentum, the approach play. You're not going to find a better player on tour. But go ahead and let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. I always love to hear your guys' thoughts. As per usual, we'll have content coming for the rest of the week. Some value picks, some fades and sleepers, our weekly DFS live stream, which will be Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any of that when it drops, of course. Also, make sure you smash the like button before you hop on out of here. It helps me out with growing the channel and lets me know that you guys actually enjoy this type of content. So I appreciate that. I appreciate all the support here. Of course, best of luck with all of your lineups, all of your outright bets for this week, and let's get this cash.